Shane Banner never asked to be a symbol of anything. All he wanted was to run his cattle, keep his fences strong, and live the kind of life where your land speaks louder than your voice ever has to. His 300-acre ranch sat just outside the boundary of what was once a small community. But over time, development spread like spilled gasoline, one tract of starter homes at a time. Then came the HOA. And then came Karen Dillinger. For years, Shane had kept to himself, only occasionally trading a nod with new neighbors at the feed store, or when he hauled hay down County Road 7. The new subdivision had popped up on land that once belonged to a dairy farm, and though Shane didn't love the change, he figured they'd stay on their side of the fence, and he'd stay on his. But that wasn't the kind of thinking Karen Dillinger accepted. She wasn't elected HOA president so much as she took the role by force of personality. She was always walking around with a clipboard, giving out rules like she was ordained. Karen believed in community integration, which to her meant order, submission, and total visual control. To her, the presence of Shane's land, wild, open, fenced and muddy with the honest work of livestock, was offensive. Worse, it was visible from the walking trail the HOA had put in along the eastern boundary. Karen started calling it the blight. The first time Shane heard from her, it was a letter. It wasn't even addressed to him properly, just left in his mailbox, and signed but printed on paper with a faded HOA logo in the corner. The note asked for limited public access to the open acreage for the benefit of community wellness, and invited him to discuss how your ranch could become a more integral part of the Crescent Valley development. He burned it without replying. A week later, someone left a flyer for a community town hall meeting on his front gate. It featured a photo of a smiling family on a green field that looked suspiciously like his pasture, with the caption, "Imagine what this could be." Shane didn't attend. That's when the complaint started. Anonymous calls to the fire department reported excess fuel and chemical storage near his barn. He got a visit from animal welfare investigators after an email tip suggested his cattle were living in substandard conditions. The county tax assessor's office reached out about a suspicious zoning anomaly. None of it stuck. Shane's papers were clean, his facilities compliant, and his animals well cared for. But each incident required time, paperwork, and more than a little stress. He wasn't surprised when he saw Karen parked at the far end of the fence line one morning, taking photos with a long lens camera. She wanted to break him, but what Karen didn't understand was that Shane Banner was made of tougher stuff than most. He had buried 2 parents and a brother, rebuilt his herd after a record drought, and fought off a wildfire with nothing but a backhoe and a water tank. He wasn't about to be moved by a woman with a clipboard and a neighborhood newsletter. Instead of playing defense, he called his lawyer. Reuben Daly was a third-generation attorney from Amarillo, sharp as a branding iron and just as hot when provoked. When Shane laid out what had been happening, Reuben didn't smile. He just nodded and said, "Let's get loud the right way." They started by gathering every document. Shane had kept meticulous records, letters, voicemails, copies of every anonymous notice. Reuben submitted FOIA requests to local offices and got hold of zoning petitions and planning board minutes. That's when they found the smoking gun. Karen Dillinger had filed a proposal with the zoning commission without informing Shane that would reclassify a large section of his ranch as multi-use community green space. The petition included fake maps, forged signatures from supposed residents, some of whom turned out to be names pulled from an old phone book, and a proposed trail system that ran right through his cattle pastures. She hadn't just been annoying. She had been plotting a land grab. It took 3 months of digging, cross-referencing, and preparing, but when the time came, Shane and Reuben showed up at the community meeting with a laptop and a plan. The room was packed, neighbors curious, a few sympathetic, others oblivious. Karen stood at the front in her usual self-appointed command position, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Reuben let her talk first. She smiled too wide, spoke too fast, and rattled off some vague spiel about shared space, neighborly responsibility, and mutual benefit. Then Shane stood up. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. He just plugged in the laptop and played the video, a trail cam clip showing Karen walking the fence line, spray painting survey markers. Then came photos of the falsified documents. And finally, the letter from the zoning board acknowledging the forgery. The silence in that room could have cracked bone. Karen's face turned the color of a bleeding sky. What followed was fast. HOA board members disavowed her. Residents whispered. One man openly cursed. Reuben delivered a clear statement. The Banner Ranch was not for sale, not for use, and not subject to HOA authority. And that anyone, including Karen, who set foot on it again without permission would face criminal trespassing charges. The room erupted in applause. Karen didn't show her face again. Within 2 weeks, she was removed from the board. The lawsuit Reuben filed moved quickly, armed with irrefutable evidence and local pressure. When it reached court, Judge Foley didn't mince words. "This is not about neighborly unity," she said from the bench. "This is about the organized and sustained attempt to coerce, defraud, and intimidate a private citizen for the benefit of a self-appointed authority." Shane won everything he asked for, a permanent injunction, a restraining order, and damages high enough to fund legal fees, land restoration, and a few improvements around the ranch. But that wasn't the end of the story. The lawsuit changed everything. Not just for Shane, but for Crescent Valley. It was the kind of case that made headlines. Rural rancher defeats HOA in explosive court battle, and it caught fire with people who had their own stories. Local news ran segments. Talk radio hosts picked it up. Soon, regional papers from Amarillo to Austin started calling Shane a folk hero. That made him laugh out loud the first time he heard it. Him? A hero? He was just a rancher who wanted to be left alone, but the public didn't see it that way. Once the details of the case were laid bare, especially the video footage of Karen spray painting survey flags and a blurry image of her throwing what looked like trash over the fence, people began to relate. The HOA was no longer some faceless bureaucracy. It was a name, a face, a woman with too much ambition and too little restraint. And Shane had stood up to her, methodically and legally, without screaming, without threats. Just with evidence, grit, and a damn good lawyer, strangers began showing up at the edge of his ranch, taking pictures next to the new steel sign at the entrance that read, "Private ranch, not HOA land. Trespassers will be rowed out." He'd meant it to be funny, but people took it seriously, and seriously loved it. Then came the tourists. It started with a retired couple from Oklahoma who asked if they could take a freedom photo at the fence. Then came a blogger from Nevada who did a video tour of the area, calling Shane's place the new Alamo of landowner rights. Ruben, ever the strategist, convinced Shane to lean into it, not sell out, not commercialize, but open the gates just wide enough to let people see the truth. So Shane launched Justice Trail Tours. Every Saturday, a few dozen visitors would climb aboard a hay trailer, and Shane or one of his ranch hands would take them around the property. They showed off the fields Karen tried to rezone, the cameras that caught her on tape, and the site of the now infamous town hall meeting. They even mounted a small TV on the trailer so visitors could rewatch the court footage and media interviews. It was tongue-in-cheek, sure, but it was also meaningful. People came from all over. Veterans who'd lost property battles with zoning boards. Retirees who'd been bullied by HOA rulebooks. Young couples trying to figure out where to buy land without being hemmed in by neighborhood codes. Shane shook their hands, told his story, and at the end of every tour, reminded them, "What's yours is yours. Don't ever let them scare you into thinking otherwise." The tours paid for a new barn and a gravel lot for visitor parking. And when an entrepreneur offered to build a small shop near the ranch's front gate to sell shirts, mugs, and keychains with slogans like, "No Karen Zone," and "Keep the land free," Shane agreed, on one condition: no caricatures. No mockery. It wasn't about humiliating Karen. It was about standing for something. But that didn't stop him from commissioning the statue. It was Ruben's idea, really. Half serious, half satire. They called it the HOA Rodeo Bull. It stood in the center of the ranch's event yard, a life-size bronze sculpture of a snorting, wild-eyed bull with a nameplate. Karen. It wasn't flattering. It wasn't meant to be. Visitors lined up for photos. Kids climbed on it. Local musicians started using the backdrop for informal concerts. It became a landmark, and then the Jubilee was born. Shane wanted to celebrate. Not his own victory. He didn't care for parties, but something bigger. The idea of private ownership. Rural resilience. So they planned an annual event, the No Karen Ranch Jubilee. A weekend of barbecues, bluegrass, horse shows, bonfires, and what one reporter called rural defiance done right. People came in trucks, campers, vans, and on motorcycles. Some brought dogs. Others brought stories. Over 2,000 people attended the first year, and nearly doubled at the next. They weren't just tourists. They were witnesses. They had their own Karens. Their own battles. But here, under the wide Texas sky, they found community, not from a homeowner's charter, but from shared values and open gates. By the third Jubilee, Shane had a team managing the event. It featured booths on rural legal rights, homesteading, land ownership basics, and even a panel hosted by Ruben on how to stand your ground without losing it in court. Local food vendors lined the perimeter, and country bands played late into the night. A massive banner stretched between two hay balers read, "Welcome to free land." And through it all, Shane stayed the same. He still woke before dawn, fed the horses, ran the fence lines. He still fixed his own tractor, and knew every ridge and dip in his land by heart. But when he walked among the crowd now, people recognized him, not for what he built, but for what he kept. He didn't talk about Karen much anymore. There was no need. She had faded into the background, her reputation shattered, her name now shorthand for HOA tyranny. Rumor had it she'd moved to a condo in another state. Shane never checked. He didn't need to. His land was quiet now. His peace restored. But more than that, he'd turned a battle into a beacon. And every person who came to see the ranch, to ride the trail, to take a photo with the bull, they weren't just visiting. They were remembering what began as a legal scuffle in a dusty Texas town matured into something larger than even Shane expected. Each year, the Jubilee grew. Not in spectacle, but in meaning. Vendors came from farther out. Musicians played longer sets. More people brought their families, their stories, and their gratitude. Shane was still just Shane, still running the ranch, still early to rise, still checking the fences, but the people who came to see him now saw more than a rancher. They saw what it meant to hold your ground. The media came back around eventually, but this time with more reverence. A PBS documentary crew asked if they could film the Jubilee. Shane allowed it, but only if they filmed the land too, not just the faces, but the soil, the fence posts, the creaking barn doors, and the wind whipping through the grass. "The land tells the story better than I do," he said. The documentary aired under the title Boundaries. It won awards. High schools screened it. Law professors assigned it. Ranchers hung DVDs in their barns like trophies. One quiet, weathered man, standing in front of a stretch of Texas land no HOA would ever touch, had reminded a fractured audience what it meant to own something outright. And to keep it, lawmakers took notice. Shane never lobbied for anything, but his story was cited in hearings and town halls across multiple states. Bills were drafted, some passed, limiting the powers of HOA boards, mandating clearer zoning processes, and protecting private property lines from what one senator publicly called suburban expansionist overreach. Shane didn't run for office. He didn't write books. He didn't get rich. But when Ruben handed him the final accounting one year, the ranch tours, the Jubilee merchandise, the sponsorships, Shane looked it over, scratched his beard, and said, "Well, now I can finally afford to fix that north fence." The fame never went to his head, because he didn't see it as fame. To him, the ranch was always the center of it all. Not the crowds. Not the bull statue. Not the articles or interviews. Just the land. The place his father and grandfather had worked. The soil that soaked up generations of calluses and sweat. The only thing he'd ever truly needed to defend. His neighbors changed too. The ones who once looked at him sideways became regulars at the Jubilee. Some moved in closer, hoping to raise their families on land untouched by the bureaucratic creep of HOA governance. Others came with questions, unsure how to stand up for their rights. Shane answered every one. Sometimes with advice. Sometimes with a look that said, you already know what to do. He never said Karen's name again, not out of spite, but because she didn't matter anymore. The statute of limitations on her legacy had run out, replaced by the deeper imprint of what Shane built. And kept. And passed on. By the 10th year of the Jubilee, the Justice Trail had expanded into a multi-stop walking experience. Visitors could walk the old zoning marker lines, see the cam footage kiosk, read interpretive signs about the case, and leave a message on the wall titled "My Line in the Sand." Thousands had. Some in marker. Some in pencil. Some in angry sharpen. All of them declaring, here's where I stood. At night, the fire still burned at the Jubilee campsites. The guitars came out. Children ran barefoot under string lights. And Shane, beer in hand, leaned back against the old bull gate, not needing to say much at all, because his story, his stand, had outgrown words. It had become a chapter in other people's stories. A reason for neighbors to speak up. A reminder that property lines don't just protect space, they protect dignity, effort, heritage. And that real community isn't built by regulations or committees, but by respect and boundary. When Shane passed away in his sleep at 78, the ranch stayed in the family. His niece took over. She grew up walking the property lines with him, learning every inch by heart. She didn't change much. The plaque on the trail remained. The bull statue got a fresh coat of bronze. The Jubilee lived on, and each year, under that same wide sky, new visitors came. Some arrived angry. Some curious. Some just looking for proof that not everything had gone corporate and cold. They left with something else entirely. Hope. The land hadn't changed. The message hadn't either. What's yours is yours. Hold it tight. Defend it well. And never, ever, let a clipboard tell you who you are. And as to say no.